The fighter has long been considered the quote-unquote easy or beginner class in Dungeons & Dragons. This is largely owed to the fact that, true to their name, most of the class's core mechanics are focused on fighting and not a whole lot else. Fighters have often struggled to provide much utility outside of combat, and with features like extra attack which not only double up but triple up on themselves, and action surge which lets you do it all again, why would they need to? The class knows what it does, and it executes on that. I think fighters have pretty consistently been one of the few classes where it really feels like the design team actually knows what it is that they kind of want from the class. A studied, careful combatant which uses their battle prowess to defeat their enemies. Fortunately, the UA7 One D&D Fighter doesn't really undo any of that, even if the new Brawler subclass leaves a few questions, but we'll get there. This newest iteration of the fighter actually takes everything that was already good about the class and turns it up, and in doing so, they make the class feel much stronger and well-rounded, and even more compelling since they've added some extra features to really help provide the class with some out-of-combat utility. So with all that said, let's talk about the UA7 fighter. At first level, fighters still gain access to fighting styles, though this time you get the benefit that we saw come along in Tasha's of being able to replace that fighting style with another one whenever you gain a level in the class. This is a really nice quality of life improvement and lends itself to a much more adaptable playstyle. You don't need to feel like the decision that you make at first level will have as much of a deterministic hold on how you can play and attack with your character for the entirety of your campaign. Instead, you can explore different fighting styles depending on how you and your character grows or based on the weapons or the environments being explored. This also thematically fits very well with the class. First level fighters also get the weapon mastery feature. This gives them access to the mastery property of 3 kinds of simple or martial weapons of their choice. This continues to grow until maxing out at 6 properties at 16th level. While it is good and the masteries do provide a solid buff to weapons overall, the biggest issue that I see for fighters is that the weapon mastery system, as it currently stands, heavily incentivizes weapon switching, or the sort of golf bag approach, where you have a number of weapons on you and you kind of just switch between them and between attacks and turns to utilize the best property in a given situation. However, this doesn't stack particularly well when magic items become available. It may not be worth it for you to forgo the to hit or the damage bonus or whatever additional features your item has in favor of using another weapon's mastery property. This kind of anti-synergy between the weapons and the mastery system itself is part of what holds me back from being over the moon about it. I still kind of wish that the properties were either more inherent to the character or provided different options to choose from, or something along those lines. The 9th level feature, Master of Armaments, slightly addresses this issue in that it now allows you to change the mastery property on any of your weapons to another one, provided that it still qualifies for it. So for example, you couldn't put the cleave property on a dagger since cleave requires the weapon to have the heavy property. This somewhat alleviates the issue of the anti-synergy that I discussed in that you're now able to move a more relevant mastery property to your magic item, but it can only be done after a long rest and not on the fly, and still disincentivizes you to switch away from your magic item unless a certain mastery property would be exceptionally potent in a given situation. It's a good feature, much improved over the Weapon Adept and the Weapon Expert features from UA5, but it still feels just a little bit lacking to me. I'm trying to reach a stretch goal of 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so if you'd like to help support me on that journey, a sub to the channel would be incredibly appreciated. Thank you all so much. Also at first level, you still get Second Wind. While the core functionality of the feature is still the same, restoring 1d10 plus your fighter level and hit points through a bonus action, you now get to use the feature twice instead of once, as compared to the 2014 version of the class. And additionally, you get to recover 1 use when you complete a short rest. This already is a really solid buff to the usability of the feature, but that trend only continues as now the amount of total uses of Second Wind you receive scales with your fighter level, starting at 2 and reaching 4 at 10th level. This is particularly useful as now Second Wind can also be used for some additional purposes, including some out-of-combat utility. The new second level feature, Tactical Mind, allows you, when you fail an ability check, to expend 1 use of your Second Wind to forego regaining hit points, but instead add that 1d10 to the ability check, potentially turning it into a success. If the check still fails, the use of Second Wind is not expended. As an aside, I really like this shift in design. The 2014 Player's Handbook was filled with features that can only be used after the roll was made, but before you knew the result. I understand that this created something of a tense decision of whether or not to use a particular feature, but it rarely left you feeling good about that decision. Either you decided not to use it and you failed, or you decided to use it and you didn't need to, which kind of taints that success a little bit. Of course, there's always a chance that you didn't use it and that you didn't need to, but odds are one of the other 2 scenarios would be applying. Many features in 1D&D, however, are doing away with that, like the new version of Bardic Inspiration, and now Second Wind, which is kind of doubling down on it. Firstly, you only get to use Tactical Mind if you already know if you failed the ability check, which is already a really nice change, but then only consuming the Second Wind if it makes the check a successful one is just the icing on top. This changes the decision from, am I okay with probably wasting X feature, to a more tactical one that balances concern for hit points down the line, since there's never actually a waste now. It's always a use of it. You either get your hit points or you get to succeed on the check. It's a simple and elegant design, and I really like it. On top of that, it gives a way for a fighter to apply that careful, studied mind to situations outside of just combat, which I also really appreciate. The second alternative use of Second Wind comes at 5th level with the new feature Tactical Shift. This feature allows you, whenever you activate your Second Wind with a bonus action, to move up to half your speed without provoking opportunity attacks. This both provides a multitude of different options for the fighter in combat, but does so by heavily playing into their aesthetic of having a deep command of the situations surrounding them. This can be used to gain a more offensive position, get out of harm's way, or to even place themselves between an enemy and an ally. There is a lot of flexibility and creativity that can be accessed through this feature, and I'm totally here for it. I always love features that provide interesting ways of granting movement, since I think so many encounters just consist of everyone kind of standing around a lot. Things like this add greater dimensionality to combat, which I find to be much more fun and engaging. Going back to second level, Action Surge is still here, and it has received a slight refinement to bring it in line with the design intent. The goal of the feature has always been to allow a fighter to perform extra attacks or do things like dash, disengage, or dodge, among others. What it wasn't designed to do was allow the casting of multiple leveled spells on the same turn, but the wording absolutely did allow for this, and this was used by many players. In UA 7, that loophole has effectively been closed, as they now explicitly state that the extra action that you get through the use of Action Surge cannot be used to take the magic action. While yes, I suppose this does technically fall into the category of being a nerf, I don't really have any problems with it. It was clearly never the intent of the feature to be used that way, so I don't really mind them closing this up. The 9th level feature, Indomitable, receives a hilariously powerful buff. The 2014 version of it allowed you to reroll a failed saving throw once per long rest, then twice at 13th, and then 3 times at 17th level, and each time it forced you to use the new roll. The new version of the feature allows you to reroll that failed saving throw with a bonus to the roll equal to your fighter level. It's unclear if this includes the original bonus that you might have, say +3 to dexterity saving throws. My assumption is that the original bonus to the type of saving throw would still apply, since you are still rolling the saving throw and not making a new ability check. In the scenario that I've laid out, you would have a +12 to dexterity saves after failing one, which is just unreal. The thought of having a +20 something modifier to a save at max level is just absurdly funny to me. The 13th level feature, Studied Attacks, is fine. If you attack a creature and miss, you get advantage on your next attack roll against that creature before the end of your next turn. It's not necessarily bad, but by 13th level, you likely have at least a +10 to hit, not factoring in any magic items, so you probably aren't missing all that much anyway, but if you do, at least this gives you a reasonable way to help ensure that you succeed on your next swing. I don't think it's great, it's probably a bit on the weaker side for 13th level. Before I talk about the new Brawler subclass, I want to discuss the growing rhetoric about the fighter class, simplicity, and the incorporation of maneuvers into the main class. Prior to the creation of the new weapon mastery system, and honestly even after it, something that many people have been calling for is to take the maneuvers from the Battle Master subclass and move them into the base fighter class. Jeremy Crawford stated in the overview video for UA 7 that this was something that the design team did explore in their early work for the 2024 Player's Handbook, but ultimately didn't go in that direction. The two main reasons that he gives for this decision was because people love the Battle Master and they didn't want to fully dismantle it, and secondly because those maneuvers represented a style of play that didn't interest a lot of people who wanted to play a fighter for any number of reasons, including if it would be too complicated and they wanted something of a simple class. To address the first point, I would say that incorporating maneuvers into the base class absolutely does not necessitate the removal of the Battlemaster subclass. The Battlemaster can still exist and serve to double down on the available maneuvers by either making them stronger, having a larger superiority die, or having more complex and tactical options and just getting more of them. There's a ton of design space that can still be explored by the Battlemaster even if maneuvers were folded into the main class. I mean, all druids get access to Wild Shape, but the Circle of the Moon tries to double down on it. The same can be true here. The second point is a little bit more complicated. While on the one hand, I can respect the team wanting to have a more straightforward class option, they are already shying away from that here in UA 7. While not necessarily complicated, this version certainly has much more to keep track of than its 2014 counterpart did. Fighting styles can now be swapped out, you start with 3 weapon masteries and get access to up to 6 and can change them on a long rest at 9th level. Second Wind now has multiple ways of using it or different effects that can apply when you use it. Its regeneration now has 2 separate recovery clocks, one for short and one for long rests. And there's now Second Wind dice that appear on the character table, which also increases as you level up. The fighter used to have nothing on its class table other than your proficiency bonus and your features. Now there's 2 additional columns that also need to be managed. The point that I'm trying to make isn't that they've made the fighter so incomprehensibly challenging to play, but rather that they have seemingly already moved away from it being very linear or straightforward. Throwing in some simple maneuver choices with built-in suggestions in the feature text, like we've seen all over the UAs over the last year, I think would go a really long way to making a class that, if executed well, could strike a nice balance of simplicity and versatility without eating the Battlemaster's lunch. Or maybe take the Cleric's Holy Order approach and give a feature early on that allows you to choose whether to take a few maneuvers or one that confers some other type of benefit that is easier to manage for the player. This allows that player to have the choice of whether they want to engage with maneuvers or not, but they wouldn't feel like they're losing out if they don't. There's a lot more to unpack here, and maybe I'll do it in the future, but for now, let's discuss the Brawler. The Brawler is a brand new subclass in UA 7 that offers a different way to play that focuses more on unarmed strikes and improvised weapons. The third level feature, Unarmed Expert, lets you roll 1d6 plus your strength modifier for the damage of your unarmed strikes, rather than them simply being 1 plus your strength modifier. This increases to 1d8 if you aren't holding any weapons or a shield, and then improves to a d8 and a d10 with the 18th level feature, Unarmed Specialist. While this is neat and flavorful for an unarmed fighter, it is essentially an entire feature dedicated to simply bringing unarmed strikes up to par with just a regular weapon. It feels a bit hard to justify spending an entire feature on this, especially the 18th level quote-unquote upgrade. Third level also gives you Improvised Expert. This makes you proficient with improvised weapons, and whenever you finish a long rest, you can choose a weapon property to apply to your one-handed and two-handed improvised weapons. For one-handers, you can select either the light or thrown properties, and for two-handers, you can select either the reach or thrown properties. And additionally, whenever you attack with those weapons, you can choose on the fly to apply any one of 3 weapon masteries. For one-handers, you can select either Sap, Slow, or Vex, and for two-handers, you can select Cleave, Push, or Topple. This, I think, is actually much better than it appears at first glance. This feature provides a ton of versatility through being able to decide how you're going to use the weapons, either throwing or melee, but also gives significant versatility in being able to select from multiple mastery properties on the fly. This is something that I've said in the past and even in this video about masteries in general. The weapons should have multiple to select from to truly make them feel like a unique tactical choice. The 7th level feature, Grappling Expert, while very thematic, I wouldn't say is particularly good. It allows you to make an unarmed strike as a bonus action, but that strike can only be used to make the grapple or shove actions. Additionally, if you're still grappling the creature at the start of one of your turns, you can deal 1d6 bludgeoning damage to it. Essentially, this is free damage provided that you maintain the grapple. It gives you more of a reason to want to grapple, so that's interesting, but it still feels a little bit underwhelming. The 10th level feature, Dirty Fighting, doubles down on the previous one, giving you advantage on your unarmed strikes or improvised weapon attacks against creatures that you are grappling. This doesn't feel worth a 10th level feature. It's ultimately a very situational advantage. I guess if your entire campaign is bar fights or attacking guards, it's pretty good. The 15th level feature, Improvised Specialist, is finally where things get really spicy. This allows you to add your proficiency bonus to your improvised weapon attacks and turns the damage die of your two-handed improvised weapons into a d12. And you can use 2 of the mastery properties from the Improvised Expert feature on the fly instead of just 1 simultaneously. Now, provided you somehow end up in a campaign that goes this long and you took enough levels in Fighter to get here, I feel like the damage potential is actually pretty high. With a two-handed improvised weapon, you're dealing 1d12 plus your strength modifier, probably at least a +5 at this point, plus your proficiency bonus, which is also +5 here. Fighters at this level also have access to 3 attacks per round, or 6 if you use Action Surge, but I'm not going to get into that. This means that with 3 attacks, you're dealing a minimum of 11 damage on a hit, so 33 across all hits at the bare minimum. This assumes rolling a 1 on all 3 d12s, and there are no additional bonuses in play either. Oh, and you can also apply 2 mastery properties on each hit. This feature actually seems really good, but I'll let the optimizers figure out if it's actually worth it or not. The Brawler subclass, much like the Path of the World Tree Barbarian, really feels like a first draft. When I think Brawler, I think of fists and punching, though I understand the thematic of a Brawler being great in any kind of scrap and using just whatever they can. The unarmed strikes portion of this subclass feels bad at best, while the improvised weapon element feels quite good. I can't help but feel like they either need to just double down on the improvised weapons aspect, making it all about it, or just give a lot more love to fighters that just kinda want to punch things. As it stands right now, it feels really hard to justify this class, except maybe in a very particular type of campaign. Ultimately, I think the fighter class is actually in a pretty good spot. It feels reasonably strong across the board, and fairly cohesive in its design. I really like the addition of features like Tactical Mind and giving additional uses for Second Wind. I just wish it was unified behind a class-wide mechanic like Key or Sorcery points and not just Second Wind. This could be accomplished by incorporating maneuvers into the base class and just having superiority dice be the core feature, but that seems extremely unlikely to ever actually happen. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to help me reach my goal of 5,000 subs by the end of the year. Feel free to check out some of my other 1D&D content, but otherwise, take care.